We are back. And today the one of the topics we want to talk about is how did we end up here? How did we end up becoming gym owners? How did we get into the fitness world? What brought us here? And today we want to talk a little bit about both of our paths growing up, going into high school, then what college looked like for each one of us, the types of jobs that we ran across, and obviously the ups and downs and how we ended up in this place where we're at today. And so I'm gonna go ahead and let Dre start with a little bit of her youth and what that was like. Maybe perhaps let's go over what you assumed you were going to be or what you aspired to be when you were younger. And I'll just let you take off.
All right. Good morning, guys. I'm happy to be back. So, if there's one very vivid memory that I have of a young girl, I wanted to be a firefighter when I was little. I remember bringing home this art project from school that said, like, this is me, or like, who are you, right? And you were supposed to write your favorite food, your favorite color, and what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I remember my mom constantly showing me that every couple years of little Dre, and her goal was to be a firefighter, right? As I got older, it started changing. I always wanted to be a nurse and to be in the medical field. And I think that just came from coming from a home where caregiving was something that I saw on a daily basis. My mom was my older sister's caregiver. And I think that's where I just got the seed planted of always wanting to help. As I got closer to finishing high school, I wasn't really, I don't want to say pushed or into college. My parents went through a divorce, so I had a lot of freedom when I was in my junior and senior year. So some of my friends wanted to leave to college to get that freedom and just to get away from home, right? You're in your late teens and you want that independence. However, I had that when I was a lot younger. So I wasn't chasing that freedom because I already had it. So I wanted to kind of have a different route. I started working different jobs. I started making some money and traveling and just kind of following my own path, you could say. So I was in a very weird space because I didn't have anybody telling me, like my parents, school wasn't something that they knew, something that they did. So I didn't have my dad or my mom telling me like, hey, you have to get straight A's, you have to go to college. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't supportive, but they weren't telling me you have to do this, you have to go do that. So I didn't have that pressure from my parents as far as education.
Did that happen just to you, or did that happen to your siblings as well?
I think everybody's experience was a little bit different. I'm the youngest of four, and when my parents were going through the divorce, I was about 11, 12, middle school. I think that's 11, 12. So my sister is 6 years older than me. The following was 8, and my oldest brother is 11. So there's a big gap. Everybody was either starting college, off in college. My sister went to college immediately after high school. She became a teacher, got her master's. She was always very driven and knew that she wanted to become a teacher and she was going to go to school, and that was her dream. My second oldest sister did the same thing. She had cerebral palsy, and my mom was her caregiver, but she went to Cabrillo College, then transferred to San Jose State, got her bachelor's. My brother and I are on the similar end. We both did a little bit of college. He became a medical assistant, but he took a little bit longer. So I like to say that our paths were a little similar in the sense that we didn't go to a 4-year, and we had a few detours here and there. But we were both wanting to work in the medical field.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a very different path growing up. Growing up, I was into soccer. For those of you that obviously follow my story, you know this, and I talk about it a lot. Um, And my goal from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to become a professional soccer player, like every little kid that plays every day, right? My dad used to play when I was younger, and I have some memories of going to, the local parks like Pinna Lake or what's that other field out in San Juan, San
San Miguel.
Miguel. Yeah, and so I remember being around that and just playing around in the dirt and with the kids. And so as I started growing up, I became really involved with soccer, and I didn't really play many other sports. I did some track in middle school and high school. I did some basketball, but that was really about it. Some volleyball. Soccer was everything, right? For me, it was everything. I got into competitive soccer at a young age. And thankfully, because of this lady that helped us out with the financial side, I was able to continue to compete, right? If you know anything about competitive soccer at a young age, it's really expensive. And then obviously there's a lot of travel involved. So it's traveling every weekend. And so my story was a bit different in the sense that my parents were very strict about school, and both I have two older sisters, and they were the first ones to go to school and learn the language English, right? And so they didn't. I'm not sure what happened with them because they didn't. They, when you're the first one out of a family, I mean, parents, immigrants. I don't think they really knew what was going on. They were working a lot, and so I don't think they got a lot of the attention like I did, and that tend to spike a little bit of what do you call it? Like division, jealousy, we can call it. And I don't think any of us really understood it at that point, right? As kids, you don't really understand. But I became, quote unquote, the favorite kid out of the family. And so I just focused in sports, and I was very driven, and winning was instilled in me at a very young age, and that was everything for me. So, winning championships, scoring goals, like that's all I really cared about at that time. And you can say I grew up with a bit of an arrogance attitude, right? When you get a lot of success as a little kid and everybody's, celebrating you and praising you and telling you that you're the best. And obviously, if your parents are not there all the time to kind of humble you down and help you control that, it can get a little bit out of hand. And that was my situation growing up in high school as well. And then I got a scholarship to University of Vermont, and I was able to go there. And then it was since our parents were so strict, the rule was basically if you don't get good grades, you can't play soccer. So I was pretty much a straight A student all up until high school, and then like sophomore year, I started getting into some fun and some partying. And I always figured out how to get the job done regardless, right? So at a very young age, I started realizing like, I can get away with certain things, but I always figured it out how to get it done. And, I think it's a great quality, but it's also a very dangerous quality to have. And it's kicked my butt a couple times. In college, when I went to college, I played Division I soccer at University of Vermont. I'd gotten a scholarship to go play there. And I remember I left like 3 months earlier to be able to be part of a summer program for cultured kids, right? I went
I
into
thought you were gonna say to party.
well, that's
what it was.
I moved during the World Cup in 2010, so that's what really happened. But they moved me because I was going basically into an all-white school. It was like, I think the Hispanic population was like 0.8% or something like that, not even a percent. So it was going to be a big culture shock. And for me, I didn't really think about much at that point, right? I was 18, moving away from a small town into this whole new world. And, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't talk about is in the Division I sports, it's a whole nother world. I mean, at 18 years old, you're treated with so much I guess we can call it freedom. Like, you go into this new world, but you already come into a group of kids. You already have your group of 30 that you already welcome you in. You're thrown gear at you, right? Whatever you would need. There's a lot of help. And so basically, you're there to play soccer, right? I went in with the mindset that I was going to go play soccer. I didn't go in with the mindset that I was going to school. And so I didn't really put much attention to school. I put all my focus into soccer at the beginning. But then because I went early, I was also introduced to the partying scene a little earlier than everybody else. And so I got hooked onto that very early on, because once again, coming from a small town, you get thrown into this world. And for me, I just didn't know how to control myself and how to handle myself in those type of situations. And like I said, I always got the job done regardless. So I learned how to be able to party and how to play the next day, with no problem. And, I was very fortunate that at that time I was in great conditioning. So it never really affected me. I could go out and party the night before, show up to practice, and just still beat everybody in a conditioning. And that also did create a little bit of, once again, the arrogance, right, in a young athlete. And I think I remember once, I think a coach was like, if it doesn't affect you on the field, I don't want to hear it, right? So, like, if you're going to go out and do your thing, make sure that you show up and you get to work, right? And so I was able to do that. But what happened over time is my body started breaking down, and I started running into injuries. And, 5 years in college, 5 season-ending injuries, like 3 games into the season. And at that time, I didn't really understand what was going on. It was like, oh, man, I'm injury prone, bad luck, right? But now looking back, it's like, well, alcohol, right? Tons and tons of alcohol, tons of partying, tons of late night, poor recovery, and then you're getting work like a D1 athlete, right? You're working extra hard, tons of miles in, preseasons, multiple sessions a day. And the competitive, right? Competing for your spot every single day. It was a very interesting environment. It was a Shark Tank, right? You're fighting for your spot every single day, and you wake up and you have these 30 guys that are your friends, but when we get on the pitch, it's me versus you, and I'm gonna make sure that I play on Saturday. So that was the environment that I was in, thrown in right away. Very direct world. It's either you do it or you get out. I remember seeing a guy getting kicked out on day one, right? They didn't show up conditioned, and they were pretty wealthy too. And coach was like, "Get out, day one," right? First session, out off the team. And so that was the type of environment. They send you a message right out of the gate, like, if you're not here to play, you have to leave. And once again, I came from my parents had already given me that option before. So for me, it was pretty straightforward. I was like, I'm just going to be the hardest working person on the field. But I was also the hardest working person in the party scene. So I love to party, man. It was fun. It was a great time. Like I said, I went to University of Vermont, and at that time it was a big party school. And so there was great soccer, and there was a great party scene, and I definitely took advantage of both sides of it. But yeah, that's where I eventually got kicked out of University of Vermont. Who would have guessed? 2 years into it, and then I ended up in New York at another school. It was a Division II school, and that's where I finished my career. But obviously, it was once I got kicked out of University of Vermont, it was pretty much all over. There wasn't much left in a Division II school, and I just tried to finish my stuff out. But by that time, I was already a mess. I was caught up into the big party scene, and we're talking like alcohol, drugs, a little bit of everything. And, I eventually left New York for that specific reason. I stayed in New York for a few years after college, but then I left because certain incidents that happened to me while I was there involved in drugs and just having some really bad scares at that time. And, luckily I was in a regardless of how deep I was into those problems, I was able to have this rational thought of like, I need to get out of here, or I'm really going to hurt myself to the point where, like, there's no return. And when you fear for your life like that because of your actions, and you know how out of control things can get. I mean, that was it for me. And I came back home, the one thing that I told myself that I would never do. And then, I got into the coaching world. And here I am now, fast forward 7 years, coming back from New York. And, we got involved in fitness, and it's one of the best things that I can do right now. And I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. I've gotten a lot better to tell my story. It was something that I was really embarrassed about. And it was just something that I kind of kept to myself, and I kind of deviated the story quite a bit of times when people asked me why I was here again. I was embarrassed for a while, but then I started realizing that, my story could also help a lot of people, and a lot of kids too, that have that inspiration to go play overseas or go play in the soccer world. And so now I try to tell my story, and I try to mentor younger kids, so that way if they do make it, they know what to expect. Because at that time I didn't know what was going on. I was like, here, you can have all of this, right? And I sure did. I took full 100% advantage of everything that was given to me, without realizing what the consequences were. So that was a little bit of my growing up. What else? What do you want to go over? You want to go over jobs?
Sure. I mean, I think I should tell my end of my college scene. I mean, it wasn't nearly as exciting as yours. But what I do want to highlight is I think that we both have two big failures, you could call it, that brought us, maybe I guess you could say together, right? Because we're still here. But, and I think this is something that a lot of people don't know about myself either. And it's something that still takes me a while to open up about. But just like you, I think the more that I say and the more that I share it, it makes people understand that not everybody's perfect and that everybody has had some type of failure. My college scene was not as eventful as Christian's. I stuck around here in Watsonville. I went to Cabrillo, and I started as a full-time student, and then slowly became a part-time. I started getting a couple part-time jobs. So school was one of those things that was always felt like a failure, because I would go to class and then I would drop off half of the semester, and I kept doing that until the point where I was just like, you know what? I'm over this. I'm just wasting my money. I'm taking up a slot that somebody else could be taking class. And during this time, I too started joining the party scene and the drug scene, and having a lot of weekends where I would get blocked out and I couldn't handle my alcohol. I had a problem, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And again, I didn't have those strict parents at this time. I had moved out of my home, and I was renting out another room here in town. But I was lost. I was a mess. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think just my own pressure of like, I need to figure my shit out, but I had no direction. I had nobody that was helping me. I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't know how to ask for help. So I was a mess. I was going out a lot, and eventually I learned my lesson. And not the best way, right? My cousins were in town from Indiana. We went to a bar in Santa Cruz, and I was a block away from the house. And
That's where it happens.
And guess who got pulled over? And it was shitty, right? Spending the night in a jail, and I was 22. And I was pissed off because I was there, and I was like, I'm not drunk, and this shouldn't happen to me. Everybody else is doing it. Why me? That was my mindset. And the cops were very nice to me. I didn't sit in an actual jail cell. I just sat in the chairs in the lobby. But it was a rough time. I was really scared of what my parents were going to think, what my sister was going to think. I remember I had just gotten a job, brand new job, probably the Monday before, and this is a Saturday. And I had to make a phone call that following day to let my boss know because I was a caregiver, so I had to drive clients around. And by Monday morning, the DMV was going to give them a call because they get an alerts when something goes on in your record. And I had a lot of things that I had to face, and I was like, fuck, what do I do now, right? My mom wasn't in town. My sister had just had a brand new baby, and that's where they dropped off I was driving my dad's truck at the time, and my cousins because they were out of town. So I was just in a really bad spot, and I was defensive, I think, and that made things worse, right? I didn't want to hear anything. I didn't want to listen. I remember talking to my dad, and I didn't want to hear it from my dad because he was an alcoholic when he was, when I was younger, and I felt like he couldn't tell anything to me. And the one thing he told me was just like, well, I'm glad it happened now that you're young and that you don't have a family and that you didn't hurt anybody and that you learn your lesson. And my mom and my sister, on the other hand, were two of the people that are the closest to me and two of the people that care the most about me. And I think that was the hardest, having to face them, just because I felt like a failure. And they take your mugshot, it goes online, and then it's on your record. So it was a really shitty situation because I had people sending me pictures of my mugshot and just like telling me like, damn, Dre, you fucked up. Like, you're such a good person. Like, how could you do this and that? And I was like, guys, everybody's driving and drinking. Like, I'm not the only one, right? Yeah. So I had that attitude for a long time. And I remember being in the AA classes and just being like, fuck, I don't belong here. And the instructor said something like, if you come back within 3 months of your DUI, like, you're fucked. Like, you have no solution. And I was like, I'm not coming back. Yeah. Like, I'm not doing this again, right? And it was a lot of money. I paid like over 10 grand. It's still in my driving record, so my insurance is off the roof. This year marked the ninth year, so we got one more year. But more than anything, like, that was my turning point, right? I was reckless before that. And just like you, that was my light switch of like, all right, it's now or never. And funny story is, a few years later, in our car accident, we get hit by a
drunk driver. Ironically. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how the world spins, and we talk about it now, and obviously as we mature more, we start to look at situations in a different way, right? I can relate to that. Just being in denial for a long time of my story. It was everybody else's fault. It was a school not treating me right. It was a school being racist to me. And to this point, I will say that, though. I still feel like there was some slight racism going on over there. But, it is what it is. At the end of the day, it was me that committed the mistake. And so I do have to pay for the price. But you were talking about your parents being there for you and having to face a lot of people. And, I was in a very similar situation, but my story was a little different in the sense that when I left, my parents weren't really involved in any of the process of me getting to school. It was just one of those things where I filled out my own application. I did everything that I had to do. And it was just like, hey guys, I'm heading out. Like I got a scholarship. I already took care of everything. Right. My parents didn't really know anything about the paperwork or what it took so I handled all my stuff to get there. And one of the things my dad said to me before I left, he said, just make sure that if you ever get into any trouble, I don't want to hear about it. Just make sure it gets taken care of. Right. And so at a young age, I think one of those things, like, as a parent, it makes sense. I get it. I can see where that comes from. As you try to tell your young adult son that's about to walk away with his head like this, right, to figure out his shit. Like, if, be a man, which I think is what he was trying to say, own up to your actions. But then we interpret it as a very different way, right? Because at that point, when it all came down for me, it was, once again, there was that embarrassment of like, well, I can't tell my parents that, I got kicked out of school. And I didn't, man, it was probably like 2 years ago that I told them, and it wasn't like that bad, right? But it was embarrassment. I kept it from my parents. I kept it from everybody back at home because, when you come from a small town and you're living the dream, and a lot of these kids that play soccer, particularly in these towns, not a lot of them make it out. And one of the few that actually got to play, and you have this dream that you're going to make it, and then you fall short, and then the next thing is embarrassment, guilt. And so I just covered it. I figured out, I did exactly what my dad told me, right? I took care of it. I was able to find another school. I got in, and then I got into more trouble, and I covered it, and I figured it out. I always figured it out. So that was one of the things. But looking back, like, it was a really difficult moment because I didn't have really anybody to talk to. It was just figure it out on your own. And I think now looking back is like, if I was able to have an open table where I could go and talk to someone and say, hey, these are the mistakes that I made, and I could get some guidance, or I could get some professional help at that point, right? Because now we're talking about depression, we're talking about now dealing with alcoholism, we're talking about dealing with drug addiction, right? It's a lot for a 20-year-old kid to handle, and we hear a lot of stories of other kids who can't handle it, right? And obviously we know what that leads to. And I just remember being in a really, really dark place at that time, and just, well, what's the solution? Well, we're just going to distract ourselves, and we're going to just go harder and harder on the partying side, and act like everything's okay, right? And so that was my side of the story, where I didn't really have anybody to go to, and that just kind of spiked everything even further because, I felt alone. I felt alone for a very long time. And that was definitely a difficult moment in my life, that it's taken me, and we talk about this now, like before I couldn't even talk about it, without bawling my eyes out. But I've told my story quite a few times now, and it's a lot better. But it's over the last 2 years, I think that's been where I've kind of brought all these emotions and all these conversations out, and it's definitely helped me look at the world in a different place. And obviously now that Luca's born, it's given me a different point of view, and it really makes me conscious of what example I give to my son, or what are those things that I say, because you might mean something, but it might be interpreted in a different way. And so I think that's a big takeaway to take, because you got to be careful, especially when you're sending your kids off to college. Like, you have to be there for them. You have to be open. In my household, we just didn't talk about problems. Whenever a problem arose, we just act like it never happened, and we could go 2-3 days without talking, and then one day we're like, hey, I'm ready to talk. And so that's how I grew up, with dealing with problems and dealing with difficult conversations. And now that's one of the things that, as an adult, I struggle with the most. I struggle with, and we've had it in our relationship where it's like, I just turn off. If there's a problem, I turn off, and I don't want to talk about it. And then 2 days, 3 days later, it's like, all right, well, let's talk. Let's act like it's like nothing ever happened, right? And it's obviously it creates other issues in the future, but I think one of the biggest things that has helped us is just being able to be open about it now, and like you said, instead of judging each other and saying like, oh my God, you're such a bad person, is understand, because you've obviously gone through some very difficult moments that at that point you didn't really quite understand how to handle, or how to control yourself. And, I also went through some very difficult moments and was exposed to a complete different world that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, where things just got, completely out of control. So, yeah, very, very interesting to see. And, like Dre was saying, fast forward a few years later, when Dre and I met, we obviously met each other when I got back from New York. And when I left New York, I completely stopped all the drugs. Like, and I'm talking like the heavy drugs. We'll smoke a little weed here and there, but other than that, it was just, it was all the heavy stuff that I got rid of, that I picked up when I was in Vermont, and it really skyrocketed when I got to New York. It was just everywhere, and I made good money, and I had access to it. So, when I came back home, I completely stopped all that, but alcohol was still there, and to this point, like, it's still one of those things that I'm working on getting rid of, and it's taken a long time to really tailor it down. I remember the last 2 years in New York, I mean, we drank every single day that we were there, every single day for 2 years straight, right? And we still went to work, we still made money, I still showed up to everything, right? That's what you call a functioning alcoholic. And I, even to the point when I started coaching, I was still doing it, and I would be able to go party and show up to the next day and tell people to don't do it, even though I was doing it myself. But when we met, we started doing the same. We're figuring ourselves out. We're doing a little better. We can say we were on the way to improvement, but obviously those habits linger around for a while. And I think when you have two people that are lost with each other, well, it's like a perfect recipe for more destruction. Yeah. And it's taken us quite a bit of time to get through all of that together. Right. Because like when another wake up point was the accident, right? The accident was a big wake up point. Like, we were going to go party, that day, and we actually had some alcohol in the car that we didn't drink, right?
We were taking it to the
party, and obviously we know what would have happened if we actually made it to the party. And ironically, that day we got hit by a drunk driver. We got T-boned. Dre broke her arm in 4 places. My whole mouth was shattered, lost a bunch of teeth during it, and it was just one of those moments where you get smacked in the face by life, literally. And, man, it was such a big turning point for us. I believe that day definitely saved our lives, because once again, like, things were getting better, but they were also starting to kind of go in the other way. And it's one of those things that I always tell people, like, it's great that you're making changes, but if you don't become aware, you could easily fall back into that world again. And it's super, super quick, because it's so familiar, right? When you know that world, it's so easy to just go back to those old habits and just act like there's nothing wrong. Working your problems out takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of awareness. And it takes just tons and tons of work day in, day out. And you have to face a lot of things on a day-to-day basis that you don't want to. And it's exhausting, which is why I believe a lot of people just fall back to their old habits. But it's also very rewarding when you see yourself come out of those holes and move forward. So, yeah, that's how I see it. What do you think? Man, we have like so many deep stories that we haven't told. And
I think we haven't talked about this in a while. Because it's really hard digging in your past, and just every time he talks about his story, I get the chills, because on my end, I feel like I was very lucky to have a very close relationship with my older sisters and my mom. And in the early stages of our dating, like he was talking about, it was very easy for him to shut down during an argument and go a couple days without talking. And I was like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, how does he expect me to, just jump back and be like, oh, hey, nothing happened. You haven't talked to me in 3 days. And now we're going to go, have dinner. And it was very easy for me to judge because I didn't understand. I didn't know his story. He didn't want to share that with me, and he wasn't ready to. And um, little by little and with time, I started understanding his behavior, understanding his childhood, and it all started to make sense. And I had a different perspective, right? Instead of judging him, I was able now to listen and to see where he came from. And now, 7 years into our relationship, it's still hard at times, but I think we're learning how to understand each other and how to be open and not be so quickly to judge and to attack one another, right? Just to take a step back and listen to each other more than anything. But we've been through a lot. We met 2016, 2017. A few months after we met, we're quote unquote dating. My older sister passed away. Then the car accident, right? That was a little less than a year. So we've had a lot of very moments that have made a big impact in our lives. And I think that all have been a big learning experience for us. But more than anything, have helped us be where we're at today, right?
Yeah, we got into the fitness world, started coaching, got into the corporate world, started coaching at a gym. Then that ended, and when I got into the car accident right before that, I had just left the corporate gym, and I knew that the corporate gym was closing the PT department. I got inside information on it, so I was able to get out early before I got laid off out of nowhere. And I ended up in a what do you call it? In a growing place, like growing marijuana, right? And because it was during that time that it became legal, and so in Salinas there was all these greenhouses that were growing it legally. So one of my clients at that time, her dad had just opened a farm, so I ended up at the farm, right, managing labor. No clue about what it was, but somehow I got into it. And then we got into that car accident. And after the car accident, that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to go back to coaching. And we converted 2-car garage into a studio, right, where we started training all the clients again. Did that for 3 years. Then I went and worked for Santa Cruz Power with Chris.
We planned
the Easy Preps, the meal prep company. Then COVID hit.
In between that, I became a medical assistant.
You became a medical assistant, right?
Then we went to Oaxaca and we're going to move there.
Yeah, we were all over the place. And these stories will continue, right? So we'll tell you the storyline as to where we'll take off next, right? But gym, marijuana, gym again, own studio, Dre becoming a medical assistant, us going to Oaxaca and then saying we're going to move for a year there, us trying to figure all that out, and then a new idea spikes next day, like, hey, we're going to open a meal prep company. I'm working for Chris at Santa Cruz Power while doing that.
I start doing training, so I start doing PT.
Yeah, Dre does PT. What else did I do? Oh, COVID hit. Dre's pregnant. COVID hits. We shut it all down. We're stuck at home for a while doing at-home workout videos. I end up going to work construction after that. Oh, yeah. I leave the construction. I go back to training. Your mom tells us that we can't be there anymore. So we open up Envision here on Main Street, and and that's how it's been. It's been bouncing back and forth. I feel like those 3 years, I just felt like a ping pong ball. It was just getting tossed around right and left. Right. But it was life, I think, also trying to be like, all right, come on, let's push you up. And once again, I remember being a little bit upset when we got kicked out of the garage, right? I don't think we got kicked out. I think she just was like, hey, I think it's time for you to go or go do something else bigger because you got a lot of clients. But at that time I was like, man, I feel like I got blind hit, and but it helped me. It pushed me forward, and I'm grateful that we took that decision to move into the gym here at Main Street, because now we're doing our second location here next door for the kids, and hopefully in the next few months we can move into the next location that we have in mind. So there's just a lot. There's a lot to unpack there, and obviously we'll leave some for the next stories to come. So maybe we'll pick up the storyline, as to maybe we should dive deep into easy preps. I think that would be a fun one to talk about. But yeah, that's how we in a very short conversation. That's how we ended up here. There was a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of failures, right? There's been a lot of understanding each other.
A lot of change, a lot of adapting.
Yeah, it's tons of it. And, I think a lot of people want it to be very linear, and they think that certain people have it better than others. But it's tough. And I'm not the only one. I know a lot of business owners have very interesting stories. Everybody has a very interesting story. I think we're all humans. It's part of life. We all deal with some type of death in our family. We all deal with some type of drug addiction in our family, right? Everybody has a little bit of everything, whether it's themselves or it's a friend or a member of a family, right? Diabetes, cancer, all these things, right? And, when I listen to people's stories, sometimes I'm like, man, I have it good. My story isn't as bad as that one, but it's meaningful to me. Your story is meaningful to you. And I think everybody should take that into consideration, that your story is your story, and it has to be as meaningful as it is to you. And don't worry about what other people think, right? Like, if you want to share your story to inspire other people or for other people to learn, that's great. But don't be embarrassed by your story, because I lived in that world for quite a bit of time. And I think in small towns, it's really hard because there's so much like everybody knows each other and everybody knows your story, and everybody makes these assumptions. But one thing that I've realized, and we all know this, is that we all have a little dark side, right? Oh, we all have a dark side that we're all try to keep away from everyone. But, when you start bringing that out, you realize you have so much commonality with so many different people. We're a lot more alike than we think we are. And the more we're able to share, the more we're able to become more vulnerable, I think the more understanding we can become. Mm-hmm. And, it takes away a lot of the judgment that we see a lot because
I feel like it normalizes.
Yeah, 100%.
You not being quote unquote perfect, right? Because especially in these small towns, you find people trying to put up a front, right? People want the flashy lifestyle. They want other people to have this image of them, and we all know it's not true. Yeah,
that's pretty. We've all been there too, right? Yeah. I've put up a front for a long time. I think we've all gone through it, and it happens a lot in smaller towns, I believe. But at the end of the day, one thing that I found that's very valuable is people. Having good people around you, there's nothing better than that, right? When you're surrounded by really good people who understand you and who care for you and who love you, there's no material or anything else that matters more like that. Yeah. And that was one thing that was very difficult for me to understand, because family wasn't a big thing for me growing up. It wasn't instilled in us. There wasn't a lot of connection, and I always stayed away from it because it was strange to me. It was, the word love and all these things for me just didn't exist in my childhood, and it was very, very difficult for me to say it and for me to express it to other people. And if you know me, I'm still it's getting there. I still keep my distance, but I do try to share with my son more often now, and I make an effort to say it more, because I think it matters a lot. And whether we understand it or we don't, I think part of it is something about that word means a lot to the human, and it needs to be said a little bit more. So, yeah, that's my emotional side coming out again. So sweet. All right. Well, next topic. What's it gonna be?
Where are we
Are
at in our list?
Are we gonna dive into easy preps next time?
Yeah, I think that's the next portion of it.
Yeah, easy preps would be a fun one. Easy preps was crazy, by the way.
Oh my
That
god.
was a crazy story. It was built in a car. It was built in traffic, Santa Cruz traffic. I built easy preps in my head. That's how my head spun pretty wild.
Yeah.
That was fun. It was fun and it was crazy.
Yeah, your side of the story is very different than mine. Easy preps it was fun. It was challenging. It was a little bit of everything.
Yeah. But I think that was when we realized, like, all right, we can do this, right? We have the skill set to be able to sell, which we did, right? We sold a good amount. We have the skill set to problem solve. We have the skill set to figure all these things out, right? And now I want to help other people as well to be able to figure out how easy it is to actually start a business. Because I think a lot of people have this concept that
It's so hard.
it's so hard. It's literally just go to the office, go to the
get
city,
paper,
get your paperwork,
yeah.
fill it out, and then go to the health department if you need to. And it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's the fear responsibility, right?
yeah,
You think of
then it's
somebody
real.
saying like, "Oh, I have my business," and you're like, "Oh shit, like,
Yeah.
they're business owners, right?"
Yeah,
and
it's real.
it's a difficult step for a lot of
Yeah.
people to take, especially in again small towns like these, because we don't talk about that. We don't.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of guidance
Yeah.
and communication about that type of topic, and it can feel scary for somebody that doesn't have that support.
What's the sacrifice?
Yeah,
The
and
big
that too.
sacrifice that you have to
That
give up.
too.
Right. Sweet. So we'll cut it there.
It's a wrap.
And then we'll talk about easy preps on the next one. Have a good day. Thank you for listening.
See ya.